everybody. You are getting a vlog just for me this week because John is in Texas being funny at people for money, but I'm going to answer questions instead of, I know we haven't done that in a little while, so I'm hoping that we can dig through because you guys are sending in a lot of questions, which is really awesome and great, but also means that sometimes I have to play catch up with a vlog to try to get to all of you. So I'm going to just dig through a bunch of questions today and then maybe talk at the end a little bit about what we're doing right now. And let's just dive in because some of these are bananas. So the first question is, I don't remember where I read this, but there was an article that said the reason Zeus went on a raping frenzy is so that Hercules would be born to deal with the giants that Gaia created, and then the Battle of Troy was orchestrated so that Zeus could get rid of the demigods that were born as a result of this Batman gambit for Hercules to be born. Is this part of Greek myth? No, it's not. I don't know where you read it either, but as far as I know, there's nothing in Greek mythology that says that's actually a thing that happened. For one thing, the Trojan War wouldn't be very good vehicle for getting rid of demigods because it actually doesn't get rid of very many demigods at all. Most of the demigods in it, for example Aeneas, actually survive, and then most of the people that die in that are actually just human heroes. You could play them as Scions if you wanted to, but they aren't actually said to be Scions in Greek mythology. So dudes like Ajax or Hector going down is sad, but it's not actually the death of a Scion. Secondly, no, Zeus is just like that. There's no like overall reason you could point to be like, oh, but he had a good reason for assaulting a bunch of women so he could have babies. No, that's just because Zeus likes women and does not have very firm morals. So I hate to bust your bubble. If you do find out where you found this, I'd love to read it just to see what they're talking about, but as far as I know, there's not really any grounding for it. But that doesn't mean you can't use that as a plot for a Scion game if you wanted to. If you wanted to say Zeus ran around having a whole bunch of Scions because he was trying to create someone to fight in the Gigantomachy for him, then sure, you could definitely do that. And you could definitely say the Trojan War, the Indian War, any of the other wars the gods run were actually intended to destroy Scions, even though they were bad at that job, so maybe not. But you could definitely run that as your own plot in a game. That's completely fine, or any variation thereof. But as far as I know, Greek mythology doesn't actually say that that's what happened. Second question. How do you mechanically deal with Thor's strength belt and how it works since it doubles his strength, especially if he pops ultimate strength while wearing it? Well, first of all, ultimate strength doesn't matter. Because once you pop ultimate strength, you have ultimate strength. Your relics don't matter anymore. You are as strong as it is possible to be in the entire universe. You can't double strength infinity, so your relic no longer affects you. The same way that like someone who had a relic that added successes to their health rolls it's not gonna do anything if they pop the savior because they're the savior already. That's the awesomest anyone can be at health. Your relics are there for times when you are not using ultimates, because those are the times you actually make rolls, can fail, etc. So first of all, don't even worry about ultimate strength, doesn't matter. Secondly, we actually don't, most of the time is the answer, we don't deal with Thor's strength belt mechanically. And the reason is that unless you actually have a Scion who is fighting Thor, you don't need to know. It doesn't matter. Thor being really, really strong is a storyteller tool, and you can say, oh, he's strong enough to do X, oh, he's strong enough to do Y, oh, he's not strong enough to do Z, like in that one weird time when his son had to come out and rescue him from the giant that had fallen on top of him. But as long as you're not actually fighting against a PC who has to make rolls, it doesn't matter. You just look at it and say, this is a representation that Thor is really incredibly epically strong because he has this belt, and then you roll with that however you want to as a storyteller. Whatever you say happens, so, represent him being strong in whatever way makes the most sense to you. If you have something crazy happen, like somebody else gets hold of Thor's strength belt and you want to know what it does, like if some Scion somehow manages to steal it and wear it without their middle section blowing off, then you would probably want to actually stat it out. There's a few ways you can do it. It says doubles, so maybe it doubles their dice pool every time they do something that is a feat of strength, or doubles their successes if you want to get really bananas crazy, although I wouldn't recommend it. That's insane. Maybe it just makes things cost less, which is kind of like doubling the effectiveness of your strength, or whatever you can think of that you think is a good idea. If this is something that a Scion gets hold of and you're going to let them have, you need to come up with a mechanical way that's going to work for them. If they've figured out a way to get it and then use it without being blown up. We did a little bit of that after Ragnarok. Some of the PCs actually got some of the major relics that were left lying around. Somebody's got Odin's Throne right now. Somebody's got Gellerhorn. And so we had to kind of stat those in a way that said, these are amazing multi-star relics. But they also need to have concrete stats. So just saying something like doubles your strength doesn't actually mean anything. So what I would suggest is probably just doubles your strength, doubles your dice pool when you are doing a feat of strength or you're making a strength roll. So, Thor just rolls a lot more dice when he is strengthing than he does any other time because that's his major thing that he does. But you don't actually need to mechanicize it that much if you're actually not doing anything. You know, if you're just having Thor fight something and the PCs are just watching, it's up to you as the storyteller to decide who's going to win. And you know that Thor is super strong, so it doesn't really matter. They don't need to see what exactly his relic stats do. All right, third question. How would you classify the Aztec land of Tlillan-Tlapallan? Is it a Terra Incognita, part of an overworld, a Sanctum of Quetzalcoatl, or an alternate name for some mundane place, like some scholars think it might be a name for Chichen Itza? Well, we don't right now, it hasn't come up, but for those who aren't aware, Tlillan-Tlapallan, which is really hard to say, means land of the red and black, or land of writing, because we just had a post where we talked about how that's what that phrase means. And it is the place in the Codex Chimalpopoca where Quetzalcoatl goes after he finds out that Tlillan is going to fall, and he gets super depressed, and he goes out there and, depending on, in the Codex Chimalpopoca, kills himself. There's some other versions where he goes out there and just kind of lies around being sad forever, whatever you got. So it's this faraway mythical city, and there's actually a lot of those in Aztec mythology. For example, Malinaxchtla, the sister of Huitzilopochtli, or daughter of Huitzilopochtli, that tried to steal the people from him at one point. After she's defeated by him, she goes away and founds like a magical city, and it's called Malinalco. And you have various things like that, because they're writing a narrative kind of from a perspective of people that live in an empire or city-states. And so when you say someone goes far away to X city that may or may not really exist, you're kind of doing the same thing as when the Celts say someone sailed over the sea to a land. It's a place that maybe exists, or maybe is based on a place that exists, but then again might just be mythical, and, you know, saying they went away to a faraway city is just as valid as saying they went away to a Terra Incognita, or whatever. I would say it depends on what you want your Aztec landscape to look like. If you want to have a lot of these magical cities actually exist, for example, Malinalco does exist, it is actually a city in Mexico. You can either say, well, those are real places, and this is from a time when the gods actually hung out on Earth and did stuff, so he actually went to some city, maybe Chichen Itza, and killed himself there. Or you can say these are Terra Incognita, which I think is probably the best option here. Say there's a Terra Incognita, and he actually went to Chichen Itza and then went into a Terra Incognita that is kind of on top of Chichen Itza, and that's where Tlillan-Tlapallan is. And there's not a lot of detail about what the place is actually like, other than you can come up with whatever you want from its name. So you can kind of mess around a little bit with what's in there, what he might have left behind, what signs might be able to do if they go there, that kind of thing. It's a really neat part of, you know, various mythologies. Some of them have just the easy underworld, overworld, middle of the world stack, and that's easy to work with for Scion, but a lot of them have a lot of like small auxiliary worlds that anybody could go to theoretically, that people have gone to in the past, and those are really neat places to just kind of experiment with Terra Incognita, because that's what the concept of Terra Incognita is there for, to cover all those worlds that aren't in that quick up and down succession. So definitely experiment with that, it's a lot of fun. Alrighty, fourth question. Did any of your visitations have a parent god show up in their true form, or were they all avatared down? They were all avatared down. Not because we don't like gods being awesome in their true form, but for a couple of reasons. The first one is just that all their visitations happened on Earth, pretty much, and Earth is Fate-Bond Central, and so they don't want to roll in there as Legend 12. It's just a terrible idea. You can play that if a god doesn't have Avatar. You could say this god doesn't have Avatar. Thor didn't take Avatar. He's not very bright. He could roll on down not avatared, and that would just probably be dangerous and bad for him, but he could do it. But ours generally don't. They show up avatared down. They may not be avatared down very far. We've had, for example, Loki was down there at like Legend 4 or whatever, because he's Loki and he can do that kind of thing. But then somebody like Shango, usually a little higher in Legend, not as good at like pretending to be a human anymore, really. The exceptions are there's sometimes, especially with death gods, we've sometimes had death gods actually just like kill their children, and then they don't have to go anywhere to do the visitation, and the kid just comes to them, and they're like, hey, you're a Scion, I resurrect you. It's more expensive for them because they have to pay for resurrection, but it's also, they get to do it not on Earth, so they don't have the fate bond problem. So that's always an option for death gods, and psychopomp gods can kind of pull that off too, because they can take you wherever they want and do that. Some gods even didn't show up at all, because they didn't want to deal with the fate-binding possibilities. Like, Baldur did not do Jeff's visitation, he sent a Valkyrie to go do it. Athena did not do Sophia's visitation, she sent Hermes to go drop her stuff off and tell him what was going on. Because, not only do they not like vagabonds, but they're also busy, so they don't always all show up, especially if they don't know yet if this kid is going to actually be any use, if they're going to be effective, are they going to just kind of be clown shoes, and then I'm going to have wasted my investment. Like, they don't need to waste time on you before you become something that they actually care about. So, obviously, if you're playing a god who really does care about you, loves your character as a child of theirs, then they probably will show up in person in some way. Danu did show up for Deirdre, even though she doesn't show up for anybody, so that kind of thing. But for the most part, they don't show. Sometimes they don't show up, and there's good reasons for that. And sometimes they do show up, but they don't show up. They almost never show up at their full power level. It's just dangerous for them. And the second reason that we do that is actually because we want to save something for later. Like, it's really neat to be like, oh my god, here's this god in all his full glory. It's super cool. But you gotta remember, your Scions are going to be ramping up in power and seeing more and more powerful things all the time. And so you don't want to blow the whole wad immediately. If they come in and see somebody who's Legend 4, like, that's already insanely high above their power level as mortals. Like, that's craziness. They're going to see that person as this magical, amazing thing, and they're not going to be disappointed that they didn't, see a thunderbolt thrown, usually. And so by showing them, a lower level of power, then every time as they gain in power, they can continue to see those people being even more powerful. You have something to say for later. You have something to say, okay, when they become a demigod, then they're going to see the god in his full power. And then when they become a god, maybe they're going to see some gods busting off avatars. You want to keep the epic, massive scope of the game, so you don't necessarily want to show them everything the first day, because then it becomes old hat for them a little bit. It depends on the player some, but we like to kind of reserve things so that when there's a really important thing going on, we can be like, boom, here's this crazy, awesome thing you've never seen before, and they get really excited, and that's fun. All right, our next question. Can you name some of the titans that might have been responsible for the shattering of Tartarus? Well, that's really an individual storyteller call, and it depends on what you think actually happened to make Tartarus shatter. If you think that Tartarus shattered because a whole bunch of gods, or a whole bunch of titans, were in there just beating against its sides till it broke, then you probably will want to look at the gods, or titans, that actually have the greatest amount of strength, the greatest amount of ability to just break things. So you might be looking at Chaos and Destruction Titans, because they're great at breaking stuff. You might be looking at guys like Atlas, who are incredibly strong. You might say, the combined force of them beating against the walls of Tartarus for millennia finally broke it down. On the other hand, you might say, because Tartarus is a magical place, actual physical strength doesn't really matter, it's more of a metaphysical thing. And in that case, you might say, okay, maybe the Fate Titans were involved. They managed to, over time, manipulate fate enough that they could say it's our fate to break out of here, and then it became possible. So you might do something with people that have those kinds of fate connections. There's obviously the triads of ladies, although depending on your game world, they may not be titans, they might just be goddesses. But there are titans that have fate powers, especially the original generation of the Dodecatheon. The Greek titans, like Phoebe, all kind of have prophecy or mystery connections. Phoebe, for example, was the original Delphic patron after Gaia, and she handed it over to Apollo, which is why his name is Apollo Phoebus, in honor of her. So you could do something like that. You could also say fate's not enough by itself, that makes it possible but doesn't actually do it, in which case you would say somebody needs to be in charge of saying, okay, we've served our term, and then you bring the Justice Titans in. And the Justice Titans are able to do basically a giant collective pardon, where they say, we've been in Tartarus long enough, that counts as being officially punished for whatever our pantheons think we did, you have to let us out now. And because of the way justice works, justice would at some point just eventually be like, okay, Tartarus stops existing, you guys aren't in prison anymore. And that would be a problem too. And then finally, the one that we've suggested in our fan pantheons is that we've suggested that the Titan of the Aliha, Allah, because he's a Titan of basically breaking down borders, combining everything, psychopompery, it's possible that he was able to break down the border between Tartarus and everything else. And you could also bring in any other Titans that you feel like are very close connections to that kind of liminal imagery, where they're crossroads gods or travel gods or gods that are all about breaking down borders. Again, the Chaos Titans are useful here because they're about breaking down everything. So it really depends on what you as a storyteller think Tartarus is and how you think they were kept in there. If you think that this is a thing that depends on them being judged guilty by the gods, and we have done some things like that, several gods have used Arbiter to bind people to Tartarus, then justice may be what you're looking at. If you think you want fate to be a bigger role, then do something with the Fate Titans. And if you just want to be like, they are just monstrous smashing machines, you can say the combined might of all of these giant monstrous things beating on the walls eventually broke it. And once you've done, and that actually brings up an interesting question, because once you've decided how they got out of Tartarus in the first place, then you have to kind of confront, okay, so the whole point of the game is that the Scions and gods are trying to defeat them and put them back in Tartarus. So how is that going to work? What do we do now that we know what happened the first place that broke it? How do we prevent that from happening again? How do we make sure Tartarus doesn't break again as soon as we put them back in there? Which is actually something that our god level PCs are dealing with right now. They re-imprisoned several Titans, and then they found out that Tartarus couldn't handle the strain and was likely to break open again, and they would just have to deal with them all over again. So they're working on a crazy metaphysical journey where they try to figure out a way to shore up Tartarus and prevent it from opening again. And like half the Pantheon's death gods are down there, like just kind of trying to hold it together with their moxie. So you can do a lot of interesting stuff with Tartarus, what it is, what it means. Obviously in the original Greek, it was part of the underworld that was reserved for the imprisonment and punishment of people who were just really terrible. And since Greek mythology involves nobody ever being able to die, gods and titans don't die because they are immortal. You had to throw them in Tartarus because you couldn't kill them. So the only thing you could do is put them in jail forever. That may not be the same. Obviously, science framework supports that by saying don't kill titans. Horrible things happen when you kill titans. But you can also play a little bit with, like, what does Tartarus mean to other cultures? How do other cultures use Tartarus? What does it mean overall as a place in the setting? So that didn't really answer your question. It just gave you a lot more questions, but hopefully those will be fun to pursue in your storytelling. The next question is, how do you deal with negative epic appearance in a party? Every game I see forces that player to get my eyes are up here or visage great and terrible or get kicked out of the group. Nobody wants to be constantly terrified of you or throwing up. That's true, nobody wants those things, but you know what? They have to man up and deal with it. Honestly, this is one of those cases where players need to deal with it. And it's not because we're being cruel, it's because they're saying, look, when you are, as players are saying to another player, you can't have that power, it inconveniences us, you are doing something wrong. And that doesn't mean that you can't call another player out if they're being an asshole about it. Like, if they get negative epic appearance and they constantly dreadful mean you all the time for fun, that's probably not okay, and you may need to address that at the table. But if they just have negative epic appearance and it just bothers you by existing, you know what? That's a thing that you have to deal with. It's a thing that happens in mythology. Nobody is excited about Hel having negative epic appearance, but she's there and they need her to do things, so they're going to have to deal with it. And nobody's excited about Kali having negative appearance, but you know what? She's there, she does useful things, suck it up. You can get things, we found that a lot of our negative appearance PCs do buy My Eyes Are Up Here, mostly because when they're heroes especially, it is hard to interact with human society when you are super scary. People freak out, people shoot at you, people panic and call you a monster, and it's uncomfortable. So sometimes they buy it just to be able to slip under the radar a little bit more. They don't buy it for their party members, though. Party members suck it up. Just the same way that any other stat you could turn on another party member. The only difference with appearance is that it's on all the time. And frankly, it's only as much of an inconvenience as regular, like, positive appearances, because positive epic appearance is constantly distracting everybody, too, just in the other direction. And the fact that you like looking at them doesn't necessarily mean it's less of a problem sometimes than that you don't like them. For example, we've had several games where the positive appearance person would pop center of attention for something, and then the rest of the band was stuck taking -4 penalties because they couldn't look away from him to do the things they were trying to do. Distracting. It's a problem. But people with negative appearance, the important thing is, are you doing something useful for the group? And if the answer is yes, then your party's going to have to deal with that. If you are, for example, Winona is a terrible monster in our Gangs of New York game, but she's also the healer. They need her. They can't say, get out of our party, we don't want you anymore, because they need her to heal them. And if the players are saying, out of character, get out of our party and make a healer that doesn't make us offended to look at him, they're wrong to do that. They don't get to dictate what your character is. Now, if your character dies as a result of that, then you're going to have to deal with that. You know, sometimes having a lot of negative appearance means people shoot tanks at you and then you die. So that sucks. But, you know, it's just, you're managing it just like, for example, someone who wins freedom, who flies, sometimes gets shot with tanks too, because that freaks the government out, obviously. Magical powers are outside your normal realm of dealing with things, and you just got to deal. What our characters have normally done in the past when they are in a party with somebody who has negative appearance, and this happens a lot. Folkvarder has a lot of negative appearance in his party. Estli has positive now because Jeff bullied her, but that was the main character bullying, and it was okay. But she used to have a lot of negative in her party. Winona has negative. Haji has negative. The Set brothers would run around scaring everybody. Paniwi has negative. So those people, their party members don't like touching them. You know, play it like you would role play anything else. This is a person who is gross or ugly or scary, and you don't like them being around. So don't touch them when you can avoid it. Cover them up with things. Some of the other PCs make Haji wear a Holocaust cloak around town, no matter how hot it is, because not only do they not want to look at him, but they also don't want other people to look at him and panic. Make sure that you play the same way that you would play if you were confronted with someone who was gross and horrifying and you had to be with them all the time. That's what you should be doing as a player, role-play, dealing with the other characters. It doesn't always mean that you're going to hate that other person. Wow, my cats are fighting. It doesn't always mean you're going to hate that other person. For example, they might have... Haji has a lot of negative appearance, but he also has a lot of charisma right now. So, you know, he's actually a very likable person. He's just also hideous. So, you know, you kind of have to figure out, how do I balance as a player what my character thinks about this person that I definitely do not want near me, but I also like and want to talk to, or I respect as a person. I really don't have any good... I mean, it sounds like your groups are not being fair to people that take negative epic appearance. It is a real thing that happens in mythology, and it is useful. You know, those same people would probably not have a problem with you busting Waking Nightmare and clearing the field of enemies if you need to. Like, that shit's useful and awesome, and they don't get to dictate what you buy, and they don't get to dictate what you do with it. If you are being disruptive and difficult to the game, like you are intentionally grossing people out or causing it to be difficult for things to get done, that's something that you may need to address either in character or out of character. But that's going to depend completely on the situation, and it's going to be something that you, or maybe you and your storytelling, need to talk about. If your group is actually bullying people and telling them they can't have negative appearance unless they refuse to have negative appearance, that's not okay. The same way it's not okay to tell them you can't have manipulation because then you might make me do things I don't want to do. That's something you have to deal with. It's part of the mythic landscape. Nobody is really excited about Tlillan-Tlapallan being horrible and gross, but you know what? He does a really important job, so we have to deal with him. Next question. So Hera is the enforcer of fidelity in marriage, but that seems that she only enforces fidelity from wives to their husbands and not the other way around. She never comes down on Zeus, and she never smites any mythological male hero who's married for not keeping in his pants, but she comes down on all the women who cheated with Zeus. This is actually a sociological question, pretending to be a mythological question, and it has to do with the way women in marriage were treated in ancient Greece. Basically, Hera can't come down on Zeus, really. Because he's the king, and because he's her husband. Technically, at this time, it is not illegal for dudes to cheat on their wives. She can't use justice on him, because what he's doing is actually not illegal. It's shitty and morally wrong and bullshit, and if he has illegitimate children, that's illegal. And that's why she then comes down on the children and the wives. But actually, just philandering, not illegal. She can't do anything about it. It just sucks for her. Same thing for, like, male heroes. It's an accepted thing at this point in Greek culture that men are going to sleep with lots of women, that's a thing they do. It's actually good. It shows that they're virile and manly, and they have lots of romances. Odysseus is going to sleep with several people on his way home, even though he loves his wife, and that's something that not only they accept and expect, but also wouldn't even think would mean that he loved his wife any less. They'd just be like, well, obviously. God, cut it out, you guys. So, Hera doesn't really have the option to jump on these people. She's not Tlillan-Tlapallan. She doesn't live in a culture that says that's wrong and I can punish you for it. She can be horrible if she meets them in person, but most of these people she actually doesn't meet in person. The only hero she really hangs out with is Jason. And to be fair, Jason is horrible to his wife, but he also dies pretty quickly after that, because Medea takes care of shit on her own. She doesn't wait for anyone else to deal with that. So Hera is in kind of this bind where she's the goddess of marriage and fidelity, but the only people that actually can commit a crime by not being faithful to their spouses are women. So she can punish women who cheat on their spouses with Zeus, because they've made a mistake, but she can't punish Zeus. Zeus actually, in those cases, could be punished, because it's not okay to... It's actually illegal to... It's called seducing or raping someone else's wife. They would call it rape, even though, even if the other person was willing, because in Greek culture at this time, rape just means you've trespassed on the person of a woman that I own. Of course, in most of Zeus's cases, it's also rape by modern definition, because these women are either not aware or not volunteering for this kind of stuff. So if it's someone that's married, that is not okay on Zeus's part, but at the same time, he's the king, and so she doesn't have the authority to stop him. And for most of these women who aren't married, nothing she can do. That's wrong of those women, not wrong of him. Because that's the shitty gender inequality situation that you have in ancient Greece. Now, it is illegal to have illegitimate children because those threaten the integrity of a family unit, and they could become threats to actually succession or to inheritance or to the existing family members. That's illegal, which is why she can say, you just had an illegitimate baby with someone, that baby's getting destroyed. It's not because she's evil and she hates babies. It's because that's the only place that she can actually do anything. She can get the person who cheated with her husband and she can get the resulting children, because that's not okay. So Hera would probably much more appreciate her job in a modern cultural context where things like fidelity, it's still not illegal to cheat on your spouse in a lot of cultures, including, ours and the United States, but it's obviously looked down upon. There's a lot more room for people to be sympathetic. If you cheat on your spouse, nobody's going to like you for that, usually. There's still definitely a gender inequality divide where, men are manly when they cheat and women are whores, but it's a lot more welcoming than ancient Greece. We make a little progress every year. Guys, come on. It's like World War III back there. So she might be especially doing better with that idea now, but she actually can't do anything to Zeus most of the time. So it's not that she only wants to come down on women, necessarily. It's that that's the only people that you come down on in Greek law, in Greek marriage. And it's up to you as a storyteller whether she agrees with that, because she is a goddess of that culture. She's been in that culture her whole life. So, does she agree with that? Is that what she thinks things should be, and that's just the way the world is, and it kind of sucks? Or does she think that's the thing that should change, and maybe she wants to work now in the modern day on changing it, or on helping science change it? It's completely up to you. Next question. In your fate bonding system, are the expectations and rejections worked out as soon as the legend is spent? So, for example, if a Scion spends a lot of legend, and then he quickly follows that up with some awesome heroic stuff that doesn't cost legend, does fate take that into account? Or is it just based on the initial spending? Good news, it's actually based on what you did in the scene that you spent the legend. So, for example, if you spend 10 legend on activating your animal aspect, because you're going to do a bunch of animal bullshit today, we're going to write down the 10 legend. You're going to definitely possibly get animal or stamina or animal kin, because those are the things you just rolled. But if you then use the dice that you got from that, and you do some crazy banana stuff, like you lift a building because you gave yourself animal aspect for strength, or you run across the surface of water because you're so fast now, or you throw lightning bolts. Well, not lightning bolts, I guess that would cost more legend. But if you do things that don't cost legend, but that are really super impressive there, fate will still know those things happened. You spent a lot of legend in a scene, and then you did amazing things. Or you give like an awesome speech that is just like bowls over the crowd. You don't spend any more legend on that, but because you are so charismatic, it does awesome things. You're likely to also have that as a possibility for something you might get fate bound to. Now, it's more likely that you will get fate bound to the things you spent the legend on, because that's what activated the fate bond. And usually, if you spend a lot of legend on doing a thing, and then you do some other things that don't spend legend, like, there'll be a possibility, but the likelihood will be that you will get the thing that you spend legend on. But it's definitely not a given. Other things can also affect it. For example, if someone else in the scene is really great at something that you're doing, they're like conflicting with your top dogness in that scene, so they may prevent you from getting as many fate bonds. Like, it's rare for two people to get fate bonds to strength in the same scene, because usually one of them is being stronger than the other, and that one will get the strength fate bonds. And the other one may not get negative fate bonds. They may not get bound to be weak or anything, but they won't necessarily be considered by fate as the strongest because somebody else was doing that. So it really, it depends on what's going on. And as you know, we roll in a chart, and there's always a wild card chance you'll get something crazy. And there's also a chance that you'll get something that wasn't the thing you spent the legend on. It completely depends on what you're doing in that scene, what is most fatefully or mythically notable. Like, it might be that you spent 10 legend on doing a thing, and then that wasn't the most important or interesting thing you did in that scene. So in that case, the most important or interesting thing is probably more likely. It's totally situational. But yes, it's not just the thing that you spend it on, it's whatever you did in that scene that we would usually take into account. For gods, sometimes we do whatever you did in the game session, because it just becomes like, this huge bucket of legend. So we're like, we're not going to roll it right now. We're going to roll it after you guys go home tonight. So we're going to write down, Woody spent 50 legend a day, he did a lot of crafting, he cast a lot of magic spells, and he threw his wife off of something. And then we'll decide what he gets for that. Alrighty. Speaking of Celtic underworlds, do you have any ideas on the overworld or underworld of the continental Celts and the Nemeton Devos? No. And that's not just because we're bad at research. It's actually because we don't, as like modern day researchers, actually have any real solid ideas about that. Because the continental Celts didn't record a lot of their mythology, and what was recorded was usually recorded by outside cultures, notably the Romans. We don't actually know a lot about what they thought, how they conceived of their cosmology, because they didn't write it down, and so we can't know. And they didn't like draw helpful models of the universe for us, which would have been really nice, but when does anybody do that for us, right? So instead, you have a lot of scholars that they'll either kind of elaborate on the cultures that are affecting the Nematondeva. So they might say, okay, well, other Celtic cultures have these ideas of lands across the sea, so probably the Nematondevas did too. But at the same time, you can't always say that that's true, because, the Nematondevas are continental, they don't live on an island. The sea is a place that takes you to other worlds may not be as big a deal for them, especially if they live like kind of in the interior in France or Germany. They may never see the sea. At the same time, you can extrapolate some stuff from Romans. Julius Caesar wrote down a lot of stuff about the Gaulish religion that he was busy conquering, but he also wrote it down in Interpretatio Romana, so he may just be adding Roman things to it that weren't there. So we have to kind of guess and say, does it sound like something that is legit? Does it sound like something that meshes with the rest of Celtic mythology? Or does it sound like something that maybe was added to it by a Roman who was trying to make sense of it in the context of his own beliefs? We don't actually have anything to really tell us. We know some gods are associated with underworlds, or at least with chthonic death imagery, because we would have, for example, like they show up with ravens all the time is usually a pretty good clue that they're death-oriented, or snakes, or they're shown rising up out of the ground on like an inscription. That tells us, okay, this person is probably death-aligned in some way. They probably have something to do with an underworld, but we don't know actually what that is. There's no surviving text, there's no surviving useful drawings. We've got nothing. And that is why the Nematondeva supplement just makes stuff up, because they don't have anything else to do. So it's not really their fault. They said, okay, if we're going to do these guys in Scion and they have to have an overworld and underworld, we're just going to have to make one up because they don't exist. And so that's why they went with saying, okay, Dubno Lysos is the underworld of them. We're going to say the gods also live there so that we only have to make up one world. And we're going to just make it a general soup of Celtic death ideas. And that's kind of what they went with. And then they did put out a later free supplement that added an overworld and just said, well, they've been shut out of the overworld because they killed their titan and that ruined everything. Your call if you want to use that. It's not in the official supplement. But it was written by the same company, so. But, yeah, if you're going to mess with continental Celts, Gauls, Bretons, all those people, you're pretty much going to have to accept that you don't have a lot of cosmology. And as a storyteller, you then have to decide, does that mean they don't have cosmology? Do they just not have underworlds? What happens to their dead people? Or do you have to say, well, we're going to invent some, and then kind of play that invented, reconstructed mythology idea? Or do you say, you know what, they're just using somebody nearby, which is what the original books did with the Tuatha. They said, you know what, they'll just use the Welsh underworld because we don't feel like figuring it out. Although in that case, that was inexcusable because there are Irish underworlds. But it's really kind of storyteller call on how you handle a culture that idea hasn't survived. It's totally reconstructible however you want it to be. And then finally, our last question today says, hey, on the progress bar, I see there's a secret project. Is there anything you can tell us about what it might entail and how large it might be? Well, it is a secret, because we don't want to tell you about it yet. But I will tell you it's pretty large. It has a lot of moving parts. I'm going to say like 19 moving parts. If that number makes you guys excited about anything, I don't know. It's something that John and I are working on kind of slowly. It's a thing that we want to do and get done. Both for ourselves and for our games and for you guys. But it's not one of our major projects right now, so it's kind of backburnered. We do it kind of when we have extra time or when we're like, I'm really burnt out on Titans today, can we do something else? We work on that. It will affect the game world? I don't know what to tell you about this because it's a secret project, so like I can't tell you too many things because then you'll just guess what it is. But we're pretty excited about it. Hopefully one day, far in the future, when it's actually done, you guys will get to enjoy it. Everybody will enjoy it, hopefully. That's the plan. But until then, it's going to remain a secret, so you will just have to wonder. And speaking of projects, since I'm wrapping up now, the longest vlog in the history of JSR vlogs. We've probably done one a little longer than this, but apparently I'll vlog forever. When John's not here to stop me, I will just vlog at you guys, and you will just have to handle that. Other projects we're working on, we're about halfway through. The first of the 2 Titans we're working on adding to the site. We're working on mapping the Titan realm right now, which takes a lot of time, so be patient with us, please. It's hard. So working on that. The Polynesian supplement is... It's stalled a lot in cosmology because they do have they have the opposite problem to the Celts that we just talked about, where they have cosmology that is like massive and takes forever to research and try to figure out and to combine with like different ideas from different islands. So it's a mess. So we were kind of stalled there working on that. Hopefully that's almost finished. We'll be over the hump and then we'll be able to make some better progress on it. So in other news, lots of awesome artists have been doing some just volunteer fan art for us, which is really great, and we're super excited about it. So we're going to post some of that in the next couple of weeks, and then add it to the fancy new art section on the site. And if you have suggestions for the art section, like to make it easier for you guys to use, or you want to volunteer and say, hey, I've drawn art, let's put it in there, sure. All we ask is that it has to do with our games or the gods in general. And then other than that, I'm writing fiction, but, you know, who knows? Who knows on that, right, guys? Anything could happen. Sometimes I don't write for, like, 2 weeks because of all this other junk, and then sometimes I'm like, I'm going to read a marathon and write a story in a day, and then that happens. So I can't really give you a timetable. That's what the progress bars are for, so you can watch them and be excited as we make progress. Grad school is hard, you guys. So that's all the questions for today. I'm going to wrap up this blog before you all, like, go square-eyed and vacant. If you aren't already square-eyed and vacant, thank you for staying with me. And next week, John will hopefully be back. We will talk some more about some more things, and we will see everybody then.